KRFC Fort Collins. That was Nawang Kachog, originally from Tibet, has been living in Boulder for quite a while. Beautiful Tibetan flute music. The name of his composition, Healing Through Kindness, and the album is called Music as Medicine on KRFC Fort Collins. Donna's here with her poetry guest, so be sure and stay right here on 88.9 Poetry Show coming up right now.
Good evening and welcome to the Poetry Show. This is your host, Dona Stein. This is KRFC Fort Collins. This evening, I'm delighted to welcome Rachel Brown as our poet guest here on the Poetry Show. And let's start by asking Rachel a little bit about herself.
It's so wonderful to be here. I'm so happy to be a part of the show. I am a second-year MFA student at Colorado State University. I am studying poetry, and I'm originally from near Kansas City, Missouri, but I spent a lot of time in the Black Hills of South Dakota, so love both places, love Fort Collins. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm so delighted to share this space with my best friend, my chocolate lab baby.
Oh. Is he or she listening?
I wish she were. I don't have a radio.
Okay. Well, we're going to see some of those settings in your poems that you're going to read this evening. How did you come to poetry in the first place, Rachel?
It's actually kind of a roundabout way. I started as a fiction writer and took some poetry classes as part of my undergrad degree and discovered that language could be something different in poetry. There was a musicality and a pressure to choose precise words and rhythms and phrasings that I found absolutely fascinating, and I wanted to learn more about it. So ultimately applied for MFA programs and came out to Colorado. Wasn't something I saw happening a couple years ago, but it's been a really exciting journey, and I'm so happy to be here and writing.
Oh, great. Good. Well, let's start by hearing some of your poems.
All right. Thank you so much. The first piece I'm going to read is a longer piece. It's a prose poem, lyric essay. So the guiding principle is hitting the margin of the page rather than writing lines of poetry. So it's still poetic. It's about a summer that I spent in the Black Hills with my dog alone. I was researching my great-great-grandfather and stumbled onto some really interesting history along the way. So the piece I'll read is Mystic, after the town I was staying by. Mystic. The last gold mine my grandfather worked lay beneath his mystic cabin. He was only a boy when his older brother died in an Alaskan mine, trying to dislodge ore from a shaft. Below ground, in the dark, such veins of color to blast, carry, pound, and shake, find dust and flakes. I won't walk the earth where my grandfather's cabin stood. I sleep in an upstream cabin of fresh pine. I dream. I wash and assemble and tuck away such a puzzling of footprints with my fossils, my bones, and my broken sticks worn as smooth as myself cast ashore. Today, I wake up before all the dewdrops lift from the meadow's webs and flowers, the raspberries plumping red and patches of thorn and leaf and gulches and overgrown hilltop roads, to walk the creek's doubling backs, its banks nodding with petals and the seedy heads of grass. The sun rises across my face, pine needles rustle, but I lie for moments, my cheeks soft and cool against my fingertips. I hold my legs and arms to myself, My hair is mussed across my pillowcase. In sleep, under morning's first gold and noon white, and the rose of an evening without clouds, moon at last, my soul's tracked the paths of deer and myself before me. When I finally stretch, find my glasses, unfold a clean pair of socks, I leave a warm, blank space, a familiar, such a reluctant letting go. Mist hangs heaviest above the creek, a sunny haze this valley. Here the gentle creek-carved earth lies between north and south slopes, thick with spruce and pine, and silvery green aspen groves. In fall, or at the end of a dry summer, the aspens before me blaze, gold. I approach the bridge patched with tin and nails. My condensed breath floats. Smoke lingers over my neighbor's cabin with its blue trim and matching shutters and flower boxes of sage, lavender, and dark-middled pansies. Russell rose early to build his fire. His split wood stacks settle against his sheds without walls, within his scrap metal, his fenders and bumpers, his bodies without engines. The meadow's long stalks of grass brush against the doors of 3 campers, and the floor of Mondaine's chalet with its screened-in porch, the old cabin he skidded from the downstream hills and filled with boxes of many somethings. Russell owns gallons of plastic buckets filled with creek-bottom gravel and the gold he is sure he can rock, sluice, pan, and hold up to the sun with a flash, like the men and women before us who built and abandoned this town and returned to and left it again. He's shown me his album, their black and white expressions. Our tea cooled on the Formica tabletop as he pointed out my grandfather's sisters among the school children. Margaret, the lanky girl with bangs in her face half hidden by his shoulder, late Dorothy and her blonde curls. His hands, gnarled and purpled, shook. The stitches between his nose and upper lip quivered. And here, he said, the cabin of the miner who shot at angels and choir until he couldn't hear them anymore, and this, a boat dredging for the bedrocked veins. The gold, too deep, remains still. I once panned this creek. I lost my color. I am afraid to scoop, swirl, shake, repeat again. My neighbor still seeks the hillside flakes, scrabbling without all his fingers and toes. He uses a mirror to reflect daylight into his mind's dark corners. Dust hangs in the sunbeam air, so very fine, and flashes before settling on the walls, the trodden earth, his scalp, his lungs again. When I asked Russell, after a wet spring collapsed his father's 80-year-old timbered ceiling and exposed the tunnel's maw in the ridge, he remembered setting charges as a boy and running. My flashlight could not illuminate its end, and I wondered how much hollow ground beneath us, what entrances sealed by men or so eroded and smoothed over, missed. I am young, I think, unattached. If I stand in the middle of this bridge, the creek flashing in the gaps between boards, I can see the scar of dark grass in our meadow where the Depression-era miners tried last to reach the thick gold vein 30 feet below and, failing, returned the earth to itself and passed on. I don't know how much of them I am. I reach after glimmers in the creek and pile my pretty cash in my lap, and when the stones dry in my palms without luster, I skip them into the water where they plop and tumble in the current for a spell and sink at last, glimmering. A decade ago, my sisters and I dug into our own mystic hill. When our fingers reached into a cold, unexpected hollow, we imagined other hands and a bottomless empty. We filled our found space with sticks and quartz and so buried it all again. Later, our father told us of ancient trees and the root tunnels they might leave in the earth after rotting. My father, once 1,000, 2,000 feet below ground, and always blasts and rails and the continual rattle of elevators between the surface and the homestake steps. When the lights went out, I can't fathom. I fear such dark, no self, no way forward. The sun shortens all shadows until it lengthens them again after me. The mist is gone. I see the creek stones, brown, blue, silver, through my reflection, the twigs and their rust-like algae below. I am shape, no outline in this water, a mere darkening of riffles. When I step between water and sun, the quick trout flit like shadows around and into again, the iron cook-stove a miner threw out long ago, with his bed springs and rusty cans of condensed milk, with 2 holes always bored in their lids, domestic scattering. For years, my younger sisters and I sought hill, forest secrets together. First deer paths climbing strange ridges, then networks of closed logging roads that led us to faraway gulches and long looping returns, and fireplaces and hillsides and foundations we could pace, and junk piles we poked through, the crockery, the Medix bottles, the inkwell, the one sole of a shoe, and old trees and their slashes to mark the passing of months or years, and once slender trunks that yet rise and grow fat with rings, and test holes we looked into, and piles of tailings and tunnels and chunks of quartz and slate stacked beside mines that didn't pan out, and an abandoned mouth blasted into a rock's gray face. My sisters held my feet as I shimmied as far in as I dared and pointed my camera blindly at an interior I wasn't sure was there, and, surprise, my flash revealed a second tunnel, its timbers rising from the floor and its deep, darkening down, and who knows how empty, my sudden shiver and giddy. We took our turns with the camera. The illumination, the close of dark again. I am flush with sun. In the meadow, a yellow throat and his dusk-hued mate land on a thistle's violet bulb. They rise together, scattering dew. Russell, 91, is dying. Diabetes, senility, a stubborn old man. He's most afraid of his blindness, the closing in, nothing anymore to seek. He still drives because he has memorized the road. He once found a pair of slate headstones without inscription. They must have been miners, Russell told me. A tunnel collapse, miners all. Russell wants to visit his gold mine again, its mirror, its lock within an iron cylinder that bolt cutters can't reach, and the layering of soil on sediment on creek-worn stone in the nearby gulches and hills. Water will always deepen this valley, uncovering and carrying more gold. Our tea grew cold as we spoke. I had introduced myself across the fence and asked him about the mines, the assay offices and jewelers, saloons that once crowded our meadow, and the people he knew. Who put the holes in the ground, sunk shafts, erected hearths, left souls lying around, marked time in the pine tree's bark beside a rotting cabin, drank medical elixirs, and vanished. I told him I was Jim Brown's granddaughter, his friend of years. He might remember my father, Kevin, who rode horses past his cabin when young. Russell called me girl, a curious one. He shared his pictures, his full moon's light on the creek in winter, and his little boy's shadow cast on the snow, the fox that came to drink without a stir and left delicate four-toed prints on the banks. Russell could not remember anything, his life more beautiful. I cannot dwell forever in. I follow the creek. I follow the paths I've made over ridges, my once approaches, not a footprint remains in pine needles or on grass. I leave arrows to point me back, but I don't always return the way I came. There's accidents. One day I might happen upon myself, lingering. Then, as now, and will be again, a cabin in a meadow, the morning smoke, a creek with greater flow or less, a bridge between banks, the sun or other stars, the forgotten below.
Ooh, that's beautiful. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was an amazing summer.
Wow. Well, that's quite a, do you call it a prose poem?
It's approaching lyric essay. I consider each of the sections, all the pauses, to be its own little prose poem. But together it probably approaches a little bit of a lyric essay. So a poetic essay, but I still think of them as individual poems.
Yeah. But it also has a narrative thread.
Definitely.
And the descriptions are just beautiful.
Thank you.
And very clear and crisp. But it allows me as a listener to be in it too, to experience in a way what you experienced and so on.
I think one thing I've been really curious of exploring with poetry is how to bring a personal experience and share it. And I feel as though poetry gives you a way to do that because music and the rhythm, it's a little bit different than regular writing. And so I'm so excited to delve into what that means.
Right. And fortunately, there have been people who have examined the lyric essay. I think Ellen Bryant Voigt has a book called The Lyric Essay. And several people at CSU write them. And recently we heard John Calderazzo reading his.
It was fabulous.
Yeah. So, wow. So but also it's a combination of not only your past, but also the history of this area, the mining history of this area.
Yeah, there's so much. It's exciting.
Yes, it is. And are you probably aware of David Mason's book called Ludlow? Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. Well, thank you for reading that.
Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
So we have to let our listeners know, Rachel, that this is KRFC, Fort Collins, and I hope there are some people listening online, www.krfcfm.org, and they can go to the schedule and click on that. There used to be an icon that said Listen Now, but I didn't see it the last time I was at our website. But you can still clearly navigate the homepage and get to hearing us this evening. So
I think my dog would listen if she could work the computer.
She needs a little help, I think.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, okay. Well, so you have some more. The next you're going to read is written in the form of a poem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. So I'm going to take...
Yeah, and I guess, again, I shouldn't be so arbitrary about that, but I think our listeners, many of us, expect a poem not to run from margin to margin, and a lyric essay or a prose poem will often run from margin to margin and on the page. And since our listeners cannot see what you're reading, it's kind of nice to let them know that this next one is set up as a poem with shortened lines. And after that, after you read the next poem or two or whatever, maybe we can talk a little bit about the qualities of a poem that find their way into the lyric essay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, that would be wonderful. The next poem I'm going to read is a poem I wrote in my first semester at Fort Collins. It's a poem of home. I thought I'd come out here and write about the mountains, and as it turns out, Fort Collins gave me a great perspective for thinking about Missouri and my childhood and everything that meant. So definitely a poem of home written in a more poetic format, and it's called Absence. The monarchs have returned, but to the late purpling clover of the uncut field, not the boughs of the dying front yard oak that could look like autumn again if monarchs settled on its high naked limbs and, altogether, closed their wings. When girls, we left artifacts of ourselves, the cow skull we painted blue and its blue teeth we scattered in the back pasture, our own hands and names, and understanding we wished of the old children. We found their prints, 2 hands in the chicken coop floor, a pop bottle beneath the hickory tree with the worn-out tractor seat nailed to the bole of its first strong branch. That hickory fell. Even you outgrew my palms. I remember well our growing things, rhubarb leaves and hickory nuts and tough-shelled walnuts. The tall stalks of sweet corn any storm blew over, the red and black raspberry thorns. And I remember pumpkin seeds that never sprouted, the barren mounds we watered until August, when our yard dried to dust and the creek didn't flow under our bridge for months before or after, and the fish were only husks on the banks and the backs of the short-legged tadpoles burned under the glare that no clouds hid. No monarchs that year. But I have returned to this late October, and monarchs drift from purple head to head as if they were thoughts. I came back to gather, but I have reached through every pumpkin rind, and in the court orchard all the pears are worms and flies. I remember us in gold and quiet light, and the holes we dug for seeds and dogs, and how, when very young, lightning struck our oak to its roots in the night, rushing to itself, shook every pane. You slipped into my bed and whispered, afraid. But I had heard almost nothing, only you and the sheets you pulled back, so I answered, yes, but only of.
Oh, yeah. Wow. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
There's I don't know, I guess they just call them the monarch trees, and I don't know if they're eucalyptus trees. I think maybe they are, out in Santa Cruz in California. And every year, maybe it's October, people in droves go out there to see the monarchs as they, as the air warms up and the sun comes stronger into the forest there. Then they are all fluttering their wings to get them dry, and it's an incredible, incredible sight because it almost feels as if the tree's going to take off. It's like thousands of monarchs, and they're just hanging there,
That would be
It's
gorgeous
amazing.
to see.
Yeah, and they're really migrating. They're on their way to Mexico from up further north.
Yeah, sometimes they stop a little at our farm in Missouri, so it's always fun to see.
Yeah.
Not thousands, but enough. It's
Do
beautiful.
they come from Canada that far away, or just?
That's a really good question. I've never asked them.
Yeah. We've got to get them to tell us where they're from. But I was always fascinated by the story that the ones that leave never arrive. It's like their children or grandchildren.
Huh.
So
that's beautiful.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I have to check that literature again, science on that again. But anyway, I do remember seeing the tree as if the whole tree were breathing. It's really an amazing experience. Yeah,
definitely.
Okay.
Well, my next piece is going to be similar to the first one. So it's again more interested in working between the margins instead of cutting off lines.
Okay.
It's returning the same space as home. So thinking of Missouri and childhood. And this one navigates, when I was 4, that's how it will begin. The Missouri River flooded, and it was a very interesting experience, something that has remained with me since that time. So the piece navigates between history of my experience with our farm and then that one event it keeps returning to, and we'll end there, seeing the river in flood.
Oh, wow. Wow. I mean, that could be very traumatic.
It was a little bit.
Yeah. Did you guys have to leave, or will we find out in the poem?
You'll find out. We weren't so close to the river, but it was certainly something that changed my life, at least in terms of thinking of the water. So.
As destructive as well
yes,
as...
beautiful, destructive and beautiful.
Okay.
This is called Suspension. I was 4 when levees failed along the Missouri River. We woke, sticky with summer, to Davis Creek in flood. I have dwelled along water, a watershed, one of the continent's largest, except in the summers of worst drought, when my father and I walked along our creek bed, stepped over exposed tires, concrete blocks, branches, and bottles. I grew up, a shadow across pools. I saw their leaves and twigs, water bugs, seeds, and black wriggling minnows, Missouri clay, gravel, or grass drowning yellow. In old photographs I stand, a girl beyond shallows. I pick daisies in the rain. In an old dream I sink without drowning. The river is brown. Our driveway has sunk over decades below the roots of grass. When a girl, I trolled its gravel for crystals and shells. Calcite I thought was diamond and collected in handfuls. Crinoids, our state fossil, rounded and pierced with stars that I strung like beads. Halves of brachiopods dug from the limestone beds of warm, shallow inland seas. I pretended rivulets were rivers, straddled both banks. I followed channels. My father videotaped the 5 o'clock news and snapped pictures of residents paddling canoes and rescuers motoring past roofs, treetops, stop signs, and power poles. He paused on screenshots of unbroken water and the tracks, roads, and cemeteries we knew were below. Televisions were fuzzier then. We still saw the coffins afloat. My father's pictures developed, mostly grain. During and after storms, until my father pickaxed drains into our fields, runoff pooled at the base of our hill to my ankles, sometimes shins, deposited its uphill gravel against the first board of our bridge across Davis Creek's North Fork. My mother would point to the occasional eddies, Davis Creek's revolving unders. See the whirls, she said. They can pull you below. Later, don't wander too far from home. I remember she and I, raindrops ticking the hoods of our plastic coats, each tossed half of a stick upstream and guessed which would emerge first from under our bridge. The current, carrying and leaving, obscured by the sediment it wore from its own banks, did not reflect me, or her. Our halves disappeared. My mother said, "Maybe yours will join mine at the sea." We loved what we lost. The oak that shaded our living room, its lowest branch that framed the pale bark sycamores in the fields, and the maple tree crowded by its own saplings, our driveway sloping up through hay and clover, Davis Creek parsing our farmland into before and after. That oak conducted lightning to earth, riven. My family tiptoed past its bark and hollow, all set to run, until it fell, another year's storm, away from us. exposed, fat rings for years with rain, thin and drought. Our basement cracked before or after my parents bought our house, from window to floor, from settling in or from a summer of too little rain and shifting concrete and the earth's hard clay. This underlying fracture remains. We dreaded nighttime rains, the drips we couldn't hear in the basement, and the puddles we woke to after heavier storms. We sopped up our floods with sheets that fluttered as they dried. We couldn't forecast everything. We'll always be. We're always older. My mother didn't really want to see the river, not for memories, not for better pictures. I lived in town, bounded by macadam, when my mother called me home. I was 21, nearby still. Runoff had disappeared into sewers all night. Together, we carried buckets of dirty water up the basement stairs, across the yard that squelched under our rubber boots, and emptied them in the orchard or garden, away from the crack, inches of lapping water, and still a steady, dark-flowing stain down our wall. When the earth dried, my father dug until he disappeared below ground. He exposed the crack and sealed it from without. He replaced the earth. We drove to the river anyway, a day of sun without cloud. Until we were old enough to climb its dirt banks by ourselves, my mother accompanied my younger sisters and me to our winding of Davis Creek. We looked for arrowheads, found bones instead. We poked sticks at leaves sunk like tea and at oil slicks, floating styrofoam. My mother, wearing overalls, her dark hair in a braid over her shoulder, wisps of curl around her ears, squatting on a gravel bar or skipping her own rocks, allowed us to wade, but only in boots. We couldn't know everything in the water, metal shards or snapping turtles. If we held our breath, we couldn't smell the fertilizer swept from the upstream farms, but we heard water trickling over rock and limb. Sometimes blue and black crawdads flitted between their mud pellet chimneys and the muddy clouds we stirred up as we walked along Davis Creek. They waved their claws, bold until our faces filled their temporary pools. Sometimes we only found their claws and tails. When a little girl, I visited without consent. One day was damp enough for a coat and mittens. My feet were loose in my mother's boots, kicked off and empty on the back porch. I could hear the creek before I saw it, roiling between banks. I felt solid on our bridge despite the slosh of water and foam between boards. For hours, I did not wonder about going home or the creek's possible swell over our bridge. I stomped paths in the brush and woods on the opposite side, cleared leaves, built stick and thorn houses and make-believe hearths, storefronts for friendly and invisible people. My mother called me from the homeside bank. I could not hear. She told me later, for years, when it rained, when we drove past the river, until men demolished the old bridge's trusses and supports and built them new, she dreamed of water. We again crossed the Lexington to Richmond Bridge with lanes meant for narrower cars than ours and macadam crumbling into the slow and impenetrable river, its undertow an occasional whirl. She turns, river pulling down body and frame to release us. I look beyond, oftener now, listening. A rainstorm gathers and blows east. My father parked near Madonna of the Trail, an Algonite's tribute to pioneer mothers. She weathers erect before the Missouri River, forever looking west. She holds her children with vague fingers. I once dreamed. Our plank bridge without boards I had to cross, stranded on one bank. We walked to the Lexington Bridge, one family among others, and photographers, police officers in a cruiser parked over the turn lanes for the bridge, open only to pedestrian traffic. My mother, clutching my middle sister, followed the center line. Swallows circled to and from their nests. I return when I fall asleep. Blackbirds wheeling against field and pond, and a maple spreading roots in the scar of its limb late broken. Its seeds revolve between sun and row, falling first, to later reach and swell. I wake, a river, hundreds of miles away. I finger particular scars. Unobserved, I fell back. I had never before noticed the road's gentle rise or its lack of a shoulder. The bridge seemed flat when we drove it. My father stopped on the midpoint, as high as the bridge rose, to photograph the road's descent into river. I could hear better than I could see, so much water, and occasionally gulfward trees pounding continuously the bridge's supports. I knew I might never again see water so high or hear so clearly a roar. I was too short. I climbed the railing. I leaned over.
Woo! That's kind of a scary ending there.
I'm here.
It's a good thing your mom didn't know at the time, huh? Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was an incredible experience to walk to the end of the bridge and put my hand in the water, and that was the river where we drove.
Yeah, wow. Wow, yes, indeed.
Definitely one of those things you remember.
Did she ever find out what you'd done?
I think it was the same day.
Yeah.
Shortly after. I didn't get a walk along the railing after that.
Yeah, I bet not. Gee, yeah. Well, that is amazing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's been really exciting to explore more prose poetry and lyric essays. It wasn't a form I knew about until I came to Fort Collins and studying at CSU. I took a nonfiction workshop last semester with Dan Beachyquick. And
oh, yes.
so that kind of opened my mind to different things poetry could do.
Right. Wow.
And it fit well because I originally wrote fiction, didn't even think about writing poetry. So I think the lyric essay, the prose poem, lets me combine my inclination to tell stories with the poetic language and flavor.
Yes, because and the details and the well, you don't use a lot of simile or metaphor, but you write in a way that allows us to imagine the particular phrase or the scene that the phrase describes. And I was tempted to circle some things like, she turns, and I think you're talking about your mom, or not the river, but she turns, and then river pulling down body and frame to release us. But it sounds like she dreamed of water, and it's your mother that she told me later. Okay, she dreamed of water, and she turns, river pulling down body and frame to release us. Well, so at that point, it sounds like the mother and the river become one. Was that something that happened accidentally, or did you plan that?
I think the things that happen, not intentionally perhaps, but that's a sign of working on something that seems as though it's pulling itself together, and it's exciting to be part of that. And the things that you discover, and the river, the mother, the statue, were images I was thinking of, and somehow they all pulled themselves into this one piece. And so exactly like you pointed out, I think it wasn't something I intended to do, but it meant it was right for the time.
Yeah, well, it fits beautifully, I think.
Thank you.
And the statue, Madonna of the Trail, now when you say an algonite tribute, is that the material? It's
Yes.
The statues. Okay. I didn't know if that was the name of the material it's made from.
It is. And algonite is actually specific to Missouri construction. It's sort of like cement, but I think it's the materials that they put into it to crush in that's specific to Missouri. So there's 12 or 13 of these scattered throughout the country. So there's one in Lexington.
Interesting. So, and also you mentioned clay, and it made me want to ask you if people are potters and use the Missouri clay.
I think they do. I had some friends who were potters. It's not as fine as throwing pottery, but there are certainly things that you can make little pots. And it was something we did when we were kids. And I was in third grade. I went out to the creek and got a big basin of clay that I took to class so we could build little adobe model houses. So certainly I know kids play with it. I'm not so sure about all the artists, but certainly people do play with it.
Oh, neat. Oh, we got to let our listeners know this is KRFC 88.9 FM in Fort Collins, and you are listening to our guest Rachel Brown reading poems that are set up like the way we expect of a poem, and lyric essays. I think you just heard her talking a little bit about the qualities that are poetic in a lyric essay, and to me, it was quite exciting because when I learned about the lyric essay, I don't think I could write one. But because it has narrative, it has, and if it doesn't have the physical background or setting that you have, it might have an emotional arc. But I think yours combines all these things. And so that's a very rich aspect of that format, I think.
Thank you. I'm excited to explore it more.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, what are you going to read for us next?
I am going to read an actual poem. All the rest of the pieces I have are set up poetically with lines, but this one actually tells a story. Something I'd wondered about when I was a kid. We would drive down the road in Missouri, and there was a structure that looked like a castle, and I could never understand it. It was in the middle of a field, and when I got older and the internet came about, I did some research, and it turns out it was a mausoleum for an area farmer, and so that made me wonder why he did it, and what things there were to say about it, and what I remembered from my childhood. So it's not quite a story, but it's following along with his process and his thoughts as he put this together.
Okay, cool.
And the poem is Joseph Miller's Mausoleum, Observatory. Southbound V's of snow and Canada geese, the last honking of misfit ducks. Sunset. Farm ponds mirror into a horizon, one and on, flashes of wing and body in gray fields. Water. A dread of his grave, seeped and filled. Kudzu crawls up the iron walls, rods and blank walls in late spring, and all of summer pauses in a brittle hold come frost, then snow. Cement. A gallery of holy visage above basement vaults, columns and a case of weathered stairs. Window. The sumac against the first step is as radiant as blood. Joseph once read that biblicals dried their dead in caves. Vault. He might, after all, be buried under. That sapling will one day surprise with an abundance of red and yellow shade before its limbs stretch raw and hide nothing. Observatory. A swollen moon rises between stalks of broken corn, first orange, then high, pale gold. Turret. This whistle and blow of north, and such a scintillating yonder of planets and stars. One night I will watch the Leonids fall. Empyrean. Another word for vault is sky.
Oh my. So it sounds like this is quite an edifice.
It is.
They're quite large and imposing and strange if it's in the middle of a field.
It is. It was his family field, and then, of course, the towns grew up around it. But the walls are 3 feet thick, and he built a museum on top, and there's a observatory and everything, towers. I really thought it was a castle, and I never understood when I was a kid what purpose it served.
Oh, Very nicely rendered.
Thank you.
Okay.
The next poem I'm going to read is called Catechism. And it came about from a project where I was researching my great-great-grandfather, who's an Old West figure. And one of the reasons I actually came to CSU in Fort Collins was to be close to Wyoming and closer to South Dakota than I was in Missouri, and find out more about his life and the things he did and what he dreamed about or was worried about or just what he lived. And so this poem, Catechism, is from near the end of the project, and it's about his experience. It actually came about that he met my great aunt and asked if she was Walter's child, and Walter was his only son, and she said yes, and he went back to watering his flowers. So I wondered what he was thinking when he was pretty old at this point. Catechism. What is a fence? White picket. What is white? Your mustache, our sky's edge in July. What is fence space, then? Barbed wire, life. What lives? Those poppies you're watering, shallow roots stretching down. What is water? Sunflasher, runner through time. If we all live and give life, what is God? All the world, how fenced? Define fenced again. Your stooped shoulders, the hitch in your step, and running, your breaths in and out, you and I know, running out.
Oof. My. It's a powerful poem.
Thank you. It's actually the first poem that I've ever had published. Subtropics, which is out of Florida, took this poem. So
neat.
It was very exciting, but it cracks me up that a poem about South Dakota's in Florida, at least from a publication in Florida. It's traveling a little. The next poem I'm going to read is Specific Gravity. We pass between in the what's dark but an absence, or a lonely deep we call black, because we have no true name for the shades of one body, like the noon skies not blue, but a shock of many hues in dry air, or a blur in humid weather. And we know that quick-spun colors become white, like some falling stars are only ice and stone burned up before impact, though we wish on them anyway, and continue our unfelt turning, because we are so small and so pulled to greater cores than our own, like that of the sun.
White like some falling stars, only ice and stone. No, a meteorite is different from a falling star,
Yes.
right? Yeah, okay.
My goodness, we've had that enough in the news lately.
I know.
But there's a comet coming. I haven't written a poem about a comet yet, but
Oh, is there a comet
there's
coming?
a comet coming. They say it could be the comet of the century. It would, if it survives its pass around the sun. It's never been around the sun before. It'll be super bright. I think brighter than the sun at its peak. So I've got my fingers crossed it survives, and we'll be able to see it at the end of November, early December.
Really? Oh, my.
Yeah.
There was one comet, and I forgot the name of it. People just gathered on hilltops to watch it, and it was pretty spectacular.
Definitely.
I think it was in the early 90s.
I remember that, and that's why I was so excited about the comments. It was around for over a week. I remember looking out when I was a little girl, and I was hoping it could be there forever. And when it left, I asked my dad when there would be another one, and we didn't know. So I remember how special that was, and I've got my fingers crossed for November.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Wow. All right.
My next poem is called Before Explodes. This poem's nuke is a rusty rivet-run moon that hurls toward our chimney, which is nothing more than a brick ornament, really, since the last man and woman within this verse plastered over the hole in their white-flowered parlor wall and tossed pipe and stove in the dump along their neighbor's fence row with a pickup cab and photo albums of crinkled up plastic, children blowing out candles.
It's a little upsetting to see. It seems like domesticity thrown away or something like that. It's a little upsetting to see in a natural area, isn't it?
It is. It always fascinates me, though, when it's tied to a farm or a homestead. I still think, my goodness, they littered, but it's fun to pick through and then kind of think about what their lives were, why particular things were thrown away, why throw away pictures of birthdays, and I don't know. So I write poems.
Yeah. That's why you write poems. Okay. Oh, we need to let our listeners know that this is the Poetry Show on KRFC in Fort Collins at 88.9 FM. And if you enjoy the program, please be sure to let us know. You can email us at dj@krfcfm.org, and we'll get your comments.
All right.
Okay.
The next poem I'm going to read is a longer poem, but long because it's spaced out, not long because there's many words. Dealing with time and thinking about space and how we cover that space. It's called Wind to Unwind. I begin, flickering across page, and my tongue, dry organ, gutted of key and string. I arrange this high, soft sea. I sustain a treble within my window's double panes. Nothing save for night beyond I palm the ivory, I hear through, bone through ear as well as bone. An interior without the clock's glass face, counting time. As hands point to midnight, together as noon. And
About time?
about time.
Yeah. Okay.
So the final poem I'm going to read tonight is a poem that I was thinking about because before I got into English as an undergrad, I was actually an art student, and pictures I've looked at of myself when I was young, I was drawing long before I was reading. Of course, it's easier to pick up a pencil than it is to learn how to read words, but it was a love that I've been thinking about ever since. And I ultimately made the change to English when I was in my freshman year back in Missouri because I felt as though I expressed myself better through words. The solitude perhaps of the experience, but then their memories of it and how piercing it could be to remember particular images or events and emotions and how you could bring that to the page. But I never forgot what it meant to be an artist and to look at the world a little bit differently. And one of the things I remember most poignantly is that no one has an outline, really. There's shadows. That's how we put ourselves together. And I've really been interested ever since then in how to find the lines or how to find the outlines, how one creates. And this poem is about creation and art and thinking about how it comes to the page.
Okay.
Figuring. I may suggest a whole face of bricks and a canopy without one leaf. I will plot skeletons before I hang their bones with hands and face, whose end suggests the unseen frame. There can be no greater mistake than beginning.
Oh, that's a little bit mysterious.
It is.
Well, no greater mistake than beginning suggests maybe because then you're committed to seeing it through to the end.
Exactly.
Whatever the it is.
Definitely.
And yeah, I mean, to me, that suggests begetting children where I used to have this bizarre thought that it was cruel to create a human being who had to die.
Oh, yes.
You know?
That's one interesting thing about art and writing is you can create people who last forever. I'm thinking of John Keats and Ode on a Grecian Urn, and it's both beautiful and tragic.
Yeah.
They'll be there forever.
But also I can see how it's like a visual artist starting to put something on either paper or canvas, whether it's with a charcoal or with a pencil or with a brush, that he or she is committed to doing something with it.
Exactly.
You know? Same thing with words on a page. Well, amazing, yeah.
And when I was taking art classes, we were told to first draw over the page. We would have our charcoal and just make the entire page gray, because then you didn't have the pressure of starting with a white page. And I've thought about that often, working on a computer rather than with handwriting poems and other works, but still you have that cursor blinking over this blank white space. And I think I've always, I think a lot of writers think about, what it means to create and how do you begin and what does it mean, once you're started, can you stop? And I think, what's exciting about poetry is that it always leads to something else. And so I'm excited to keep writing and keep seeing and thinking about the world and what it means.
Right. And then you say, whose end suggests the unseen frame. And the thing about art that's different from life, although maybe we do it in life, is that there's always a frame, a boundary or something to an art, whether it's the space outside the sculpture or where the material meets the space.
Or where the word meets the margin.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, thank you, Rachel. You've been amazing and inspiring and thought-provoking, to say the least.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being a guest on the Poetry Show.
It's so wonderful to be here.
Yeah, okay. Well, we have a couple more minutes, and we need to let our listeners know about, let's see if this is going to work. Oops, I don't think it is. Maybe it is. Okay.
KRFC Fort Collins, 88.9 FM, community-powered radio, and the City of Fort Collins Recreation Department bring you Lark Radio Theater.
Well, this is your Lark host, Howard Lowell. The opening Theater of the Mind for this evening is an adaptation of the 1918 one-act play by Alice Gerstenberg. The curtain is up, presenting The Unseen.
Huh. I thought that was an announcement, but it sounds like it's an actual program. Well, I think that could be next week. It could be next week. Okay, thanks again, Rachel Brown, for being our guest. And people will just have to wait for maybe 2 years to see these poems in print.
I'm really
except
excited.
in magazines now and then, right?
Yep,
Reviews.
working on magazines for now and ultimately putting a book together. I haven't quite decided Missouri or Colorado or South Dakota. It may be a combination of all of them, but I think it'll be very focused on place.
Yeah. Well, it's a very clear depiction of different places, which is very rich. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. Now, we want you to stay tuned for Mountain Standards Time with Gene, and he'll be here shortly.